a podcast about amazing people from an incredible state. Amazing Arizonans with Mike Broomhead.
It's called Amazing Arizonans, and here is a great reason why. Joining us for the podcast, Al McCoy. First of all, I can't thank you enough for doing this.
Man, happy to be here. Always nice to see you, Mike, and nice to visit with you.
Let me start off with a thank you. I don't know if you'll even remember this. I was so young in this business, and we have an association with Sanderson Ford.
Right.
And when the Coyotes were in the playoffs, the Suns were kind enough to let you do a Sanderson Ford commercial for the playoffs.
Right.
And I got to do a TV commercial with you out in front of the arena. And you were so gracious to me. I was so nervous that I had to be next to you, and I was afraid I was going to mess up my lines. It was so much fun spending that morning with you. It was a great time. I want to say thank you.
Good.
You made me so comfortable.
I'm glad that you felt comfortable, and that's the way it should be.
It should be, but that doesn't mean it's always that way. You have obviously you are synonymous with the Phoenix Suns. As a matter of fact, in one of these podcasts, I was able to sit down with Mr. Colangelo. And he had such nice things to say about you and how you were chosen for the job and the years you spent together. What does it mean to you to have that kind of a connection to that franchise?
Well, 51 years. I was the broadcaster for the Suns on television and on radio. And Jerry Colangelo is the one that made it possible because he's the gentleman that hired me 51 years ago to be the voice of the Suns. And it, as I say, was a great ride. I enjoyed it, and it was something that I had dreamed about as a kid, and to see it come to fruition really was tremendous.
I heard you tell a great story once about listening to games on a radio,
right,
and kind of introducing you into what you wanted to do. Can you tell that story and what got you interested in where you ended up?
Well, Mike, I grew up on a farm in Iowa, and this was kind of the tail end of the Depression. You remember that. It was in all the papers.
It was in all the papers. I did read about it growing up.
And we had no electricity. We had no running water in the house, but we didn't really think that much about it because we raised all our crops and food and everything. But we had a battery radio. And as a youngster growing up, I would sit by the hours dreaming a little bit about all the sporting events that I would hear on the radio, or the big bands broadcasting from all these great places on the radio. And so as a youngster, I was enthralled with the business, and I realized that that's kind of what someday, wouldn't it be great to be broadcasting from Chicago Stadium or Boston Garden or Madison Square Garden, and it became a reality.
Was it always basketball for you?
No. Probably more so baseball, because there was more baseball on radio in those days, and football. There wasn't that much. Of course, the pro ranks were just beginning, and very little on radio. There was college basketball, but probably I was more enthralled earlier with baseball broadcasting.
What was your break in radio, when you felt like it was your break into radio?
Well, it's hard to say because, as I said very early, I realized this is going to be my goal. So when I graduated from high school, and I have to tell you the story. I went to a small school in Iowa, so I was able to participate. I played basketball and baseball, and my basketball coach loved to tell the story. People would ask him, well, how come this McCoy gets so much playing time? And my coach would say, well, when he's not in the game, he's sitting next to me on the bench pretending he's broadcasting the game, and he's so bad, I just put him back in the game. He loved to tell that story. But even in high school, I had visions of being a sports broadcaster. So I was fortunate enough to get a scholarship to Drake University, which is in Des Moines, Iowa. And after my first year, I sent out probably 20 or 25 audition tapes to radio stations. And lo and behold, I got one interview. And this particular radio station in a small town in Iowa, Webster City, Iowa, had an announcer that was going into the service, and I auditioned and I got the job. So after my first year in college, I got my first job in radio. And as a matter of fact, I've been working ever since.
Have you always had the voice? You've got one of the most distinctive voices. Have you always, or did it develop over years?
I would have to say that it probably developed through the years, although I did a lot of drama and speech work, and that was my major in college, so probably I got some benefit from that. But it just so happened, as I said, that after that first year of getting a job at the radio station, the next year I was back in college, but I got a job in Des Moines at a radio station. And as I said, just continued to work while I was in college, and then things just continued to move on.
And it's interesting because I was always fascinated by radio, but never dreamed I would be in this business. And even now, if I have a game on or something at night, I'm laying in bed watching TV, I will go to sleep with the game on, and I'm listening to the game and I'm not watching it, even on the television broadcast. There's just something about that, the mental imagery that you can build as a broadcaster. And you were obviously so good at it. Did you have to work on that? Knowing that you had people that couldn't see what you were seeing, knowing they were only going to envision what you were giving them?
Well, certainly that has to be, I think, your approach. And a lot of people were surprised when I did my last son's broadcast. They had a ceremony for me at halftime. And when I spoke, I said, I want to thank all of the sightless people that have listened to my broadcast through the years, because through the years I had so much response from sightless people, and I realized how important radio was to them. It was a big part of their life, and the fact that I was able to contribute something probably kept me going for a while, because it was a great feeling to know that you could be a part of something very important to them. But answering your question again, I always had that in mind, that I was trying to paint a picture of what was happening. And I think if there was something that people probably liked about my broadcast, is they could envision what was happening as I was broadcasting the game. And that was what I was trying to do.
There are some sports where it's easier and some sports where it's more difficult.
Yes.
Basketball is such a fast-moving game. To keep up with the game and still be able to paint the picture really has to be difficult. How long did it take you to feel like you were doing both? You were able to keep up with the game, but you were accurately painting that picture for the listener.
Well, I suppose probably early in my career, I would tape broadcasts and listen to them myself to see what kind of a job I thought I was doing, And so I'm sure it evolved over a certain length of time. But as I said, when I got into play-by-play broadcasting, that was always on my mind, that I was painting a picture and I wanted to be able to come up with something that people could see in their own mind what was taking place.
Is there anybody you tried to emulate? Was there somebody you admired, or was it just kind of blazing your own trail?
Well, back as a youngster when I was listening to radio, obviously I had a lot of broadcasters. The play-by-play broadcaster for the Chicago Cubs was a guy named Bert Wilson. Many people probably don't remember him, but he was all for the Cubs, and he had some great lines like, "We don't care who wins, just so it's the Cubs." And he'd say, "Well, we're going to the bottom of the ninth, and it's 9-0, the Cubs trail, but they only need 9 to tie and 10 to win." And so Bert Wilson I listened to him every single day. And then I listened to a lot of other broadcasters. Harry Carey, of course, was in St. Louis. Bill Stern, one of the national broadcasters, and Don Dumphy, who did all the boxing in those days. So I listened to all of them, obviously.
I want to go back to that in a moment, but when people talk about broadcasters, legendary broadcasters, you mentioned some of them, your name is now synonymous with all of them. Does that resonate with you? Does that matter to you? Have you resolved yourself to that you are considered that and deserve to be, that you truly are one of those?
Well, it's rewarding No question about it. Because the business has really changed, the broadcasting business. Obviously, when I was growing up and in my many, many years with the Suns, I was considered the broadcaster for the Phoenix Suns. Now you have so many broadcasters doing sports, the same event. Someone's doing cable, someone's doing AM, someone's doing FM. So you don't have that real togetherness like Vince Scully with the Dodgers, and we could go right down the line.
Right.
Harry Carey with the Cardinals, and later with the Cubs. The business has changed because there's so many avenues that are broadcasting games, and there's so many different announcers that you're not really associated announcer to team like it was when I was starting out.
Yeah, but at the same time, people sought you out because in the minds of Suns fans, and I think the great thing for this, I moved here 30 years ago, and they really were the only game in town.
Right.
But I've seen that this is a generational market, that this is a Suns town, and you are the Suns broadcaster. So people sought you out. When it came to the Suns, you're the one they listened to.
Well, that's true, and it's rewarding because I run into people every day now that I'm not working, and they say, "Oh, I started listening to you when I was in the 5th grade or whatever," and it's not the same. So it's nice to be rewarded with those comments, but I'm also aware of the fact that time passes.
Yeah.
You move on. There's other broadcasters.
How often is the recognition the voice before the face?
Well, pretty often.
I would imagine.
Right.
Because you have such a distinctive voice. Let's talk. You were talking about some of the things you remember the broadcasters saying. Shazam, Wham Bam Slam.
Right.
Where did those just come organically, or did you work on some of those to make sure you had something that the fans would remember?
Well, when I was listening to some of the broadcasters that I mentioned to earlier, like Harry Carey, who I mentioned, Burt Wilson, who was with the Cubs, they had things that they were associated with saying-wise. And so I came from that school of thought. And and I'm one of the things that would wear well, and that wouldn't be overdone. And so that's what I tried to do through the years. And some of them lasted a long time. Probably Shazam for a three-point shot lasted longer than most. And that came about kind of by accident because when the NBA put the three-point shot in, I initially looked at it, Mike, like, well, this is going to be kind of like a home run. There'll be maybe a couple a game, and most baseball broadcasters have a home run call. Like, it might be, it could be, it is, or it's going, gone, or whatever, So I thought maybe I should come up with something. So I started thinking, and I went back, and you won't tell anybody this. I used to read comic books, and Captain Marvel was one of the comic books that I liked. He was kind of like a Superman, good guy.
Sure.
And a little guy named Billy Batson, who was a radio reporter, said Shazam, and he became Captain Marvel. And the Shazam was the first letter of Socrates, Hercules, Atlas, Zeus, so on and so forth. So I thought, so they're only going to be one or two a game. That might be a good call. So that's how Shazam came about. Of course, now there's one or two every 10 seconds,
Yeah, but also for Phoenix Suns fans, Shazam is on T-shirts.
Yeah.
It's on billboards. It's everywhere. And did you ever expect it was going to be that?
No. Because I didn't think there would be that many.
Yeah.
And the first year, the Suns, I think, as a team, only shot a couple.
Really?
Yeah. And Walter Davis, who was a great player at that time, I think he took one the whole year because nobody thought it was going to be that big a deal and it was going to work in. And, of course, now it's a vital part of the game.
Doing these podcasts, my favorite thing is to talk with people in history and to have Jerry Colangelo sit there and talk about the history of the Suns and going all the way back to the Chicago Bulls. He told me that one of the people that applied for the job that didn't get it was Al Michaels.
Right.
So you got the job instead of Al Michaels, who went on to have, obviously, a pretty good career himself.
As a matter of fact, Al has a book that he did just within the last couple of years, and he includes in that book that he applied for the job with the Suns and didn't get it, and a guy named Al McCoy did, and he's still doing the games.
Are you friends with Al McCoy?
Yes, right.
With Al Michaels, are you?
Yes.
And so have you ever had that conversation?
Oh, yes, sure.
And it's fun now that his career worked out the way it did. It's got to be, that's a great bit of trivia, and it talks about the history of the game. I learned more about Suns trivia or Suns history being here. I was in a suite the night that you were put up in the Ring of Honor. Mm-hmm. And I learned that night, which made sense, you had been a part of every single Ring of Honor ceremony, including your own.
Yes.
And to see the young players on the team come out to watch at halftime, did that mean something to you to see the young Suns player watch that?
It meant a great deal. And, of course, leading the pack was Devin Booker, one of the all-time greats ever to put on a Suns uniform, and I consider him not only a great player but a great friend. But that meant a lot. When I looked over and saw the players, the young players, particularly Booker, there, and my very last game, Booker stayed at halftime, and he was the first one that came out to give me a hug. He's special.
He is. I think that when you have the combination of someone that is that talented and works that hard, but also works that hard at being a good person, there's really something special there.
No question.
When you look at that night or that time, you and I talked before we turned the cameras on, of keeping in touch with former players as well. How much did it mean to have some of those former players come back and pay tribute to you because of the part of that organization you've always been?
Oh, it's tremendous. And as I said, that's the part about the business that has changed, because now, as you know, they draft players out of kindergarten or daycare centers, but when I started in, players played 4 years in college and then were drafted into the NBA. And we traveled together, and there was a lot more closeness. So, Dick Van Arsdale, who was the original Sun, after he retired, he worked with me for 15 years on television and radio. And I can go back with all the players. We were so much closer because we traveled, we were together, spent so much time together. And those friendships have continued. No matter those that went on with other teams, we still maintained a relationship. And that's probably the biggest thing that I miss now, is that relationship you just don't have anymore.
So some of them that have gone on to broadcasting careers, the biggest one is Barkley. Mm-hmm. Charles has gone on. He is just a huge success in broadcasting. Have you maintained a relationship with him? And if so, have you talked to him about the broadcasting part of things?
Oh yes, we have had a good relationship. As a matter of fact, the night that I went into the Ring of Honor, as you mentioned, I was shocked because Charles came. He flew in from Atlanta, and I didn't know he was going to be there. And when I saw him, I said, "Charles," I said, "Geez, I didn't know you'd come in." He said, "You think I wouldn't be here for you?" That's what he told me.
Yeah, he seems like another one that seems like a very loyal, and which is hard to find in any business, but certainly their loyalty is a difficult thing to find. When you look back at those years with the Suns and you look at the generations of Suns fans, what are some of the things that stick out for you, whether it's players or games or interactions with fans? What stands out to you? What do you remember most?
Well, the closeness with fans certainly has been special through the years, going back to the early days. And, of course, the association with players. I mentioned Dick Van Arsdale. He was the original Sun, and we were together for many, many years, and he's still a very, very close friend, both he and his brother. And it's ironic, I have twin boys, and of course the Van Arsdales are twins, Dick and Tom. But those early relationships that are still intact with fans and with players and with coaches are really, really special to this day.
When you go to a game now, you don't get to watch much of the game, do you?
Well, it's difficult, and I appreciate the fact that the fans want to have a picture or something signed, and I'd be probably disappointed if they didn't react that way. So it's a little different than being there to broadcast the game than just to watch.
Do you still find yourself, when you watch a game, in your mind calling the game?
Not really.
So you can watch as a fan?
Yes, I watch as a fan as plays are being run, good or bad, probably more so than just thinking about broadcasting it. Probably not.
Do you watch now? The Suns are out of the playoffs, but do you watch the playoffs? Are you still an NBA fan and watching the league?
Yes.
So who do you like? And when you look at the league now, who is it that impresses you the most in this league?
Well, I hate to say it, but, Boston, of course, is the team that seems to always be there, and they have the great tradition. But there have been a lot of other teams to see what Golden State did through the years. And right now, with Denver and now with Minnesota, the big year they're having. So it's nice to see the changes, and we see it more now. I mean, when I came into the league, players signed with a team, and that's who they played with for their entire career. Mm-hmm. Now they change overnight,
Sure.
You never know who's going to be with this team next year. So if a team can stay together, and that's what we've seen in Boston, we've seen in Denver, and we're seeing in Minnesota, if a team can stay together 2, 3, even 4 years, it's a big plus for them going into the playoffs. And that's something the Suns did not have this year.
So you say that about the game, but how much does it mean to you to have spent your entire career with the Suns organization?
It means a lot. It means a lot. It's something that I always envisioned, being involved with the team, spending a career as a broadcaster with a team, so it's been special.
When you are in town now, when you're not working, when you're out in public, do you see the fans' reaction to you? Do you appreciate how much people are drawn to you? You're such a. Well, the reason. Let me tell you why I'm asking. Because you're such a humble man, and I've been with you on a couple of occasions, and I see how fans react to you. But do you appreciate how much people love you in this town?
Well, I have to say I do, and I'm laughing because I was getting awfully tired of, what's wrong with the Suns, Al? What's wrong with the Suns? I didn't want to hear that anymore. No, it's nice to know that maybe you've been a part of someone's life that's been a little better.
Yeah, and
a little more fun.
And you certainly have. I think from being a fan myself and listening, I listened to you in your broadcast. And when I got into this business, you were someone I admired because of what a talent you were. And then when we were able to meet personally, and you treated me from the minute we met like a colleague, and I certainly wasn't owed that kind of respect, but you have been so much to so many people, myself included. I just didn't know if you embraced that, because I think you seem to be so humble that notoriety doesn't matter that much to you, but you have to appreciate it.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, and most people know, I was born on a farm.
Yeah.
In a manger. Well, no, across that. I was born on a farm in Iowa, and that's where I grew up, and I'm glad I had that background. And my family loved one another. We had great relationships. There were tough times financially, but you grew through it. And so I'm glad I had that background. I always said, if you can't be nice to people, who are you going to be nice to?
Yeah.
And I always said, I like to treat people the way I feel I'd like to be treated. And in this business, trying to move ahead, there were a lot of times when certain people weren't too nice to me when you're applying for jobs, because, you can get blown off pretty easily. But I never took it personally, and I said, okay, that's that problem.
What about the tough times? When you look at, not knowing people like you knew them, when Cotton Simmons passed, when things like that happened, how did you deal with those? Because people looked to you at the time when you had to be mourning, but at the time they looked to you to be the ones that consoled them and to explain the hurt to people. How were you able to do that?
Well, I met Cotton Fitzsimmons when he was coaching Moberly Junior College in Missouri. I was going to Drake University in Des Moines, and Cotton had brought his junior college team to play a JC in Des Moines, and they were practicing at Drake. And I went down to watch the practice, and I met Cotton. And we became very, very close friends. Both of us from small towns from the Midwest, growing up about the same time. And he was a people person, and he was working with me on the radio broadcast when he became ill. So Cotton was a big part of my life. He was a special person, and someone I'll never forget. It was a privilege to have known him.
Was it hard for you to share that personal emotion with the public? I know you're there to explain the game to people, but now you find yourself in a position to explain the emotion of what fans are feeling. Was it difficult for you to share those personal emotions?
It wasn't easy. No, it was not easy. But I always thought the way he would have wanted it. He wouldn't have wanted a lot of, we miss Cotton.
Yeah. I can imagine that would be how it is. Let's, before we wrap it up, let's talk about legacy. I know how people are going to remember you, but how do you want to be remembered? If you were to have just the average person or someone close to you remember you, how do you want to be remembered in this town?
Well, I guess if someone just said Al McCoy, he was a pretty good guy. That might be enough.
It's funny you say that, because anybody that's seen the commercials we've done together or heard you on the show, I've always said to them, as nice as you imagine he is, he's even nicer.
Well,
I think that describes you well.
Well, I appreciate that very much. And, I think a lot of that maybe goes back starting out in this business, because you were fortunate the way that you got in, but you have to remember that as a 18-year-old, I was trying to get jobs in broadcasting, and they weren't very available in those days. And I was being pushed aside, and no, we don't have anything. We don't want to talk to you. You can't get an interview. But I never gave up, and that benefited me down the road, obviously.
I should have asked this at the beginning. So I know you were raised on a farm. What other jobs did you do? What other jobs beside broadcasting and farming have you done?
That's it.
That's it?
That's it.
That's an amazing life.
No, because my first job I was 18. And I've been working ever since.
So you literally left the family farm and went into broadcasting.
Right.
It's an amazing life. I have been looking forward to this for so long, and I appreciate the time. Your stories are legendary, and to share some of them with the audience is great. I think that's why we call this Amazing Arizonans, because it's so Arizona-centric, and you have meant so much to Suns fans for generations. And I just thank you for sharing some of your time with us.
Well, Mike, I appreciate your work, and let me just say it's always a pleasure to visit with you.
The great Al McCoy. It's hard to, we're not going to be able to top this one, and it's why we call this Amazing Arizonans. So thank you.
I have to tell you one story. My second job in broadcasting was at WHO in Des Moines, 50,000 watt clear channel. Big.
Yeah.
And guys never left their jobs there. And I was a fill-in on announcing and did production, so on and so forth. And I had been doing some on-the-air work. And the program director one day came in, and I had been there probably 6 or 8 months. And he sat down and he said, Al, he said, I just want to come down and talk to you today because he said, I really don't think there's a future for you as an on-the-air person. He said, now everybody likes you here. Now there's some areas maybe you could get into a production or sales or something, but he said, I just don't think you have a future on the air. Well, to say anything, I was shattered. This is what I wanted to be doing my whole life. So I didn't know what I was going to do. And I went back that weekend to where I had my first job, KTAR-FM, Webster City, Iowa. The general manager was an old sportscaster from Kansas City and a stoned alcoholic, but a good guy, and I learned a lot from him. And I told him this story. And he said, hey, what is that son of a know? You going to let some guy like that tell you what? Tell him to go to hell and do whatever you want to do. And in my book, I told the story and I said, you know what? I don't know where that guy is today, but I know what I've done.
Yeah, that's an amazing. You know who Adam Sandler, the actor, is?
Sure.
He tells a story of the same thing when he was in college. His drama coach, one of his professors, told him he was never going to make it as an actor and to do something else. Yeah. And then he saw, after he was on Saturday Night Live and had done some other things, he saw that professor in a bar. And he bought him a beer and was very nice to him. Yeah. But how that professor must have looked at that and thought, what did I say?
And then I stayed on at WHO. Actually, longer than that. I was there a couple of years, and I was on the air, still doing stuff. And then I quit and went to a smaller station in Des Moines because I could do sports there. And everybody said, oh, how could you leave? 50,000 watt, clear channel, WHO, no one leaves. I said, I'm leaving.
Yeah.
And I'm out of there. And as I said, I don't know what ever happened to that guy's career.
Now we're talking, I should have turned the cameras back on. How did you end up with the Suns?
Well, when I was doing the hockey.
Yeah.
And when the NBA franchise came here, I thought, boy, this is something I'd really like to do. So what I had done is when the Coliseum first opened, there was an NBA preseason game there between St. Louis, that was in the NBA at that time, and Philadelphia. I was working at Cool, radio and TV. Yeah. And I contacted the general manager of St. Louis to see if we could broadcast the game. And he said, oh no, we don't want any local broadcast. And I said, well listen, I'll promote it on the air, the game. I'll have a whole series of spots done for it. Well, finally I convinced him that I could do it. So I did the play-by-play of that NBA preseason game. And then I have to tell you, I took the tape with a buddy of mine and edited the tape till it sounded like the best play-by-play announcer you'd ever heard, right? All the pauses and everything. So when the Suns came here, I had this tape. So I went to Colangelo and talked with him, and he heard the tape, and he was impressed, and he had a whole stack of tapes on his desk that he was listening to. And we kind of formally said, I think we can work something out. He said, I'm trying to get the station. Carl Eller owned KTAR at that time. Well, what happened was that first year, the Suns weren't selling season tickets, and things weren't going well. And so Carl Eller stepped up and he said, well, I'll tell you what, Jerry, let me buy the rights and I'll pay you a rights fee for the first 2 years and I'll hire McCoy. And I said, if I'm going to make a move, I don't want to go to work for another station. If we work out something, Jerry, I want to work for the club and do that. So I didn't do the games. Bob Vache was the announcer at Channel 12 and KTAR, and he did the games. In the meantime, I had continued my conversation with Jerry, and I told him, I said, Jerry, this whole broadcast thing is going to change. I said, right now, you've sold your rights to KTAR, but you're competing with them now because you're outselling special nights at the arena programs, and they're outselling against you. I said, it's time for teams to bring the broadcasting in-house. And this hadn't been done before. All the teams, football, baseball, basketball, sold their rights. Mm-hmm. And he kind of liked the idea. And so when it came time that KTR's deal was done, Jerry said, well, I'll give it a go. And we were the first team. Portland came in that same year later and took over their broadcast. But we were the first, and Jerry and I did the whole thing. We sold it, produced it, and of course, we only did, I think, maybe 10 or 12 TV games. Every game was on radio, but we had a small TV package for a number of years. And he and I sold it.
That's amazing.
Yeah. And he was ecstatic because they made more money the first year than they had selling the rights because we sold everything.
Sure. And
he was strong. I mean, he could call the president of Valley Bank and say, listen, we're buying lunch for you today. Al McCoy and I are coming over. And we'd go over, we'd sell. We'd sell the rights. And then we'd buy the rights from the stations.
That is... So you broke that whole mold.
Yes.
With Jerry Colangelo.
Yeah.
And what a great salesman he is.
Oh, terrific. He's terrific. He's the best.
He is.
Because he never takes no.
And with the other thing about him...
But I did everything. I produced. When we were doing TV, I'd hire directors on the road. I'd hire crews on the road.
But he was also a man of his word.
Yes.
Like you are. The integrity with him is such a big deal. He talks about it. He does seminars now and big events on integrity. And he was a guy then that he was very... He made no bones about what he wanted, but if he said he was going to do something, that had to mean something in that world. That if you're going to do something, groundbreaking, that when you go to somebody and say, "And this is what we're going to do, and what we're going to accomplish," people were willing to go along.
See, my first year with the Suns, I was still doing ASU football on TV, and I really was getting sick of it because we were doing preseason radio for the Suns and a lot of traveling. And fortunately, at the end of that year, Jerry called me in and he said, I don't think I like having you doing ASU. He said, I want you to be the Suns announcer. And I reached in my pocket and pulled out a $1 bill, and I said, well, it can happen.
Yeah.
And he said, well, it's going to happen. You're going to be our announcer.
Wow. That's great stuff.
Yeah.
It's such good stuff.
And fortunately, he always paid me well.
Yeah.
And whenever I had other opportunities, and whenever you hear somebody else was trying to hire me, hey, you're not leaving, So, no, Jerry was the best.
It's great to be loyal and have that reciprocity and loyalty. That if you're loyal to someone, that they're loyal to you back.
See, that's the great thing that Jerry had. He was such a people person that he knew everybody. I mean, he'd walk out in the arena. He knew who was working, what their kids were. And then when the club was sold, it was just a completely different atmosphere, and it just went to hell in a handbasket,
Yeah.
But Jerry was that type of person.
And he's been that way when he brought the Diamondbacks and won a World Series, what he did for USA Basketball, what he's doing at Grand Canyon University.
He's a winner.
He is. But it's who he is.
Yes.
People want to be...
connected. Because they know he's honest. He's not trying to screw anybody over. His word is his word.
Yeah. It's the way life should be.
Right.
Well, listen, thanks again.
Sure.
I love this stuff. I appreciate it.